Next, pre-bid conference. So this is according to section 22 of the 2016 revised IRR of RA 9184. So pre-bid conference is actually a forum where the procuring entities representatives and the bidders discuss the different aspects of the project. So this is where the inquiries will come in every aspect of the project, whether it is on the technical side and on the requirements, the documents on the bidding. So, lahat ng aspect ng project will be discussed on the pre-bid conference, the duration, the bid opening, the cost of the project or the ceiling price, and then everything about the technical specifications. Okay, so it is actually a mandatory activity for an approved budget for contract or ABC of 1 million or more. So statements made during the conference should be included in the supplemental bid bulletin in order to be considered as modifications to the terms of the bidding documents. So it is important that all of the matters that should be discussed should be integrated dun sa supplemental bid bulletin. So this should be scheduled at least 12 calendar days before the deadline for bid submission. The old rule that only bidders who purchase bid documents are allowed to attend or ask questions is no longer applicable. So meaning, ang pre-bid conference ay open sa mga prospective bidders kahit hindi sila bumili ng bid documents. Okay? So for contracts less than 1 million, pre-bid conferences may be conducted at the discretion of the BOC. So it is optional. Subject to the approval of the BOC, a pre-bid conference may also be conducted upon written request of any prospective bidder. So pwede silang mag-request upon approval of the BOC, then the pre-bid conference shall be conducted. So again, the pre-bid conference shall be held at least 12 calendar days before the deadline for the submission and receipt of bids, but not earlier than 7 calendar days from the field jobs posting of the IB of bidding documents. So meaning, it should not come earlier 7 days from the posting or the advertisement. So dapat papalampasin mo muna yung 7 calendar days from the day of the posting of the bidding documents. So this is where you can now conduct your pre-bid conference. And the last provision here, attendance of the bidders shall not be mandatory. Okay. So the pre-bid conference shall discuss, among other things, the technical and the financial components of the contract to be bid. The minutes of the pre-bid conference should be recorded and prepared not later than 5 calendar days, participants not later than 3 calendar days after the pre-bid conference, and shall be made available to prospective bidders not later than 5 days upon the written request. So whatever the discussion should be recorded, and it is open for all prospective bidders upon their request. So requests for clarifications must be in writing and submitted to the Bids and Awards Committee at least 10 calendar days before the deadline set for the submission and receipt of bids. So there will be room for clarification. So that is before or 10 days before the deadline set for the submission and receipt of bids. So meaning, when it is 3 days before the opening of bids, you can no longer request for clarification. So dapat may leeway siya na 10 calendar days before ng deadline ng submission. So the BOC shall respond to the said request by issuing a supplemental bid bulletin at least 7 calendar days before the deadline for the submission and receipt of bids. Any supplemental bid bulletin issued by the Bids and Awards Committee shall also be posted on the field jobs and the website of the procuring entity concerned, if available. So, itong supplemental bid bulletin is actually posted dyan sa field jobs and, of course, on conspicuous places. So, it is issued at least 7 calendar days before the deadline for bid submission. So, what are the purpose of supplemental bid bulletin? So, this is to incorporate in the bidding documents those statements discussed during pre-bid conference. So, yung minutes ng meeting, dapat ipopost yan sa bid bulletin. And then, it is also to answer requests for clarifications or interpretation. And then, upon BOC's initiative to clarify or modify any provisions of the bidding documents. So, there are actually experiences of vague matters regarding the contract, So, kung medyo malabo, the Bids and Awards Committee could clarify that through the bid bulletin. Okay? So, posted in field jobs and procuring entities website. So, it is responsibility of bidders to inquire and secure supplemental bid bulletin. Bidders who have submitted bids before issuance of supplemental bid bulletin must be informed in writing and allowed to modify or withdraw their respective bids. So, moving on to the submission and opening of bids, for the information of everyone, this is actually a 2-envelope system. So, dalawang envelope. So, the first envelope should contain eligibility requirements and the technical component. While that of the second envelope, we have the financial component. So, ano ba yung nilalaman ng first envelope? Nandito yung various permits, clearances, licenses, and some important documents to support the eligibility of the prospective bidder, whether the entity is financially and technically capable. While that of the second envelope, the financial component, we have the financial documents as well as the proposal, the BOQ, the schedule of manpower, equipment, and the like. Submitted to the BOC on the date, time, and place specified in the invitation to bids. Bids submitted after the deadline should not be accepted. So, meaning, time-bounded to. Pag sinabing alas 10, dapat alas 10. Wherein, outright disqualification or rejection, or the BOC would not accept actually the bid. Okay, so the BOC could only receive bids before the time and date of submission. The date of submission should not be later than the following period from the last day of posting of the invitation to bid. So, may reglementary period yan ng submission of bids from the first step, yung first stage kasi is yung invitation to bid. May advertise yan if possible. Magsi-circulate sa newspaper and posting through field jobs, the website, and conspicuous places. So, hindi pwede na mas later dito sa categories. The following categories say infra 50 million and below. So, it should not be later 50 calendar days. So, hindi mo pwedeng i-extend pa yung bidding from the day of posting ng 50 calendar days. While that of the infrastructure, about 50 million, you can maximize up to 65 calendar days. So in here, we have the modification and withdrawal of bids. A bidder may modify its bid, provided that this is done before the deadline for the submission and receipt of bids. Where a bidder modifies its bid, it shall not be allowed to retrieve its original bid, but shall only be allowed to send another bid equally sealed, properly identified, marked as a modification. Say for example, nakapag-submit na siya ng eligibility requirement niya and everything, technical component or technical envelope, hindi niya na pwedeng i-pull out yon. Instead, magsasubmit siya ng bagong envelope, and then it would be marked as a modification. So take note, class, that modification cannot be done after the deadline, no? So bid modifications received after the deadline shall not be considered and shall not be returned to the bidder unopened. A bidder may, through a letter, withdraw its bid before the deadline for the receipt of bids. Withdrawal of bids after the applicable deadline shall be subject to appropriate actions. Actually, may mga forfeiture ng bid security. So, itong bid security, binabayaran yan. So, kapag na-forfeit yan, of course, the procuring entity or the agency can withdraw that one. So, yun, hindi basta-basta na nag-submit siya ng bid and then a-address na lang siya sa opening ng bid. So, it has an appropriate sanctions. A bidder may also express its intention not to participate in the bidding through a letter which should reach and be stamped, received by the bank before the deadline for the receipt of bids. A bidder that withdraws its bid shall not be permitted to submit another bid directly or indirectly for the same contract. So on the submission and receipt of bids, we also have a scheduling of bid opening. So this is due to justifiable reasons. So when we have a lack of quorum, cancellation of office work due to bad weather, so these are a reasonable justification for postponement and rescheduling of bid opening. In case the bids cannot be opened as scheduled due to justifiable reasons, the BAC shall take the custody of the bids submitted and reschedule the opening of bids on the next working day or at the soonest possible time through the issuance of a notice of postponement. Of course, there will be an information to be submitted or to be submitted to the prospective bidder. So, dapat manonotify yung bidders on the postponement. So, can be posted in the field job website or the website of the procuring entity if there is any. So, moving on to the bid evaluation. So, upon receipt of bids, so we have here several stages on the bid evaluation. So, first, we have the preliminary examination of bids, and then the ceiling for bid prices, the detailed bid evaluation, and the ranking of total bid prices. The BAC shall open the first bid envelopes of prospective bidders in public. The BAC shall check the submitted documents of each bidder against a checklist required documents to ascertain if they are all present, using a non-discretionary pass or fail criterion as stated in the instruction to bidders. So parang checking lang ng presence or absence of the documents. Of course, in here, substantial dito yung expired na document and unsigned document. Of course, they must have to consider also those criterion in this preliminary examination of bids. And then, opening and evaluation of first envelope. So, the contents would be number 1, eligibility requirements. Number 2, bid security. Number 3, technical specifications of the infra project requirements. Then number 4, omnibus sworn statement. So this omnibus sworn statement shall include non-inclusion in blacklist, authenticity of documents, verification authority, signatories authority, disclosure of relations, responsibilities of bidders, labor laws and standards, non-payment, directly or indirectly, any commission, amount, fee, or any form of consideration in relation to any procurement project or activity. So the instruction to bidders. So the ITB describes the scope of the bid, source of fund, fraudulent and fraud practices, eligible bidders, eligible materials, equipment and services, clarification of bidding document, site visit, pre-bid meeting, amendment of bidding document. So we have here an attached example for ITB. So as a sample, we have here an ITB or bid documents for a project here in KSU. So we can see here we have a section for general wherein it discusses the scope of bid. So you can see that there are instructions for the scope of bid. And then the ITB also specifies the source of funds. It also describes corrupt, fraudulent, collusive, and coercive practices. So we also have here provisions for conflict of interest. So let me just read to you. All bidders found to have a conflicting interest shall be disqualified to participate in the procurement at hand without prejudice to the imposition of appropriate administrative, civil, and criminal sanctions. Bidder may be considered to have conflict interest with another bidder in any of the events described in paragraphs A through C, and a general conflict interest in any circumstances set out in paragraphs D through G below. So ano ba yung mga to? A bidder has controlling shareholders in common with another bidder. And then a bidder receives or has received any direct or indirect subsidy from any other bidder. Kasi ito, tendency, mag-uusap-usap yung mga contractor or prospective bidder, bibigyan na lang ng atras fee. So, bawal yan. So, a bidder has the same legal representative as that of another bidder for the purposes of this bid. And then, a bidder has a relationship directly through third parties that puts them in a position to have access to information about or influence on the bid of another bidder or influence the decisions of the procuring entity regarding the bidding process. This will include a firm or an organization who lends or temporarily seconds its personnel to firms or organizations which are engaged in consulting services for the preparation related to procurement for or implementation of the project if the personnel would be involved in any capacity on the same project. Okay, so those are the provisions of conflict of interest. Okay, and then on the ITB, sinasabi na rin dito enumerating the minimum qualifications of eligible bidders. So on ITB, it also contains the bidder's responsibilities. So a detailed provisions will be enumerated here. Okay. And then also discusses subcontracts. Okay. And then the contents of bidding documents. So ITB, or the instruction to bidders, also stipulates on how to prepare the bids. Okay, so we have also documents comprising the bid or the financial component, and the alternative bids, the bid prices, the bid currencies, the bid validity, the required bid security. So on RA 9184, ito yung minimum. So before you can participate, actually bid security is a part of the documentary requirements of the bid. So the minimum 2% if it is in the form of cash or cashier's manager's check. Ito yung sinasabi nating non-withdrawable kapag umatras ka sa bid. 2% also when it is in the form of bank or bank draft or guarantee or irrevocable letter of credit issued by a universal or commercial bank, provided however that it shall be confirmed or authenticated by a universal or commercial bank if issued by a foreign bank. So we also have 5% if it is in the form of surety bond callable upon demand issued by a surety or insurance company duly certified by the Insurance Commission as authorized to issue such security. And then any of the combination of the foregoing. So it shall be proportionate to share of form with respect to total amount of bid security. Okay. So again, there will be details on the bid security provisions, no, na dapat sundan ng mga prospective bidders. So also, there will be a specific sealing and marking of bids. And then discusses what will happen on submission and opening bids, the provisions, the deadline for submission, the late bids, modification, and withdrawal of bids. We also have opening and preliminary examination of bids. And then the details of the evaluation and comparison of bids. So, ito na, post-qualification. So, when the BAC already determined the lowest bidder, okay, magkakaroon ng post-qualification. And the post-qualification shall also be discussed here in the instruction to bidders. And we also have the reservation clauses. The award of contract, the signing of contract, the required performance security when entering the contract. So again, meron tayong percentages according to form of performance security. We also have the provisions of notice to proceed. Okay, so part of the instruction to bidders are the bid data sheet, so you can see it right away in a matrix form. Okay. So you can see here, the left column is the clauses in the instruction to bidders. Particular sheet or the right column would define each of those clauses. Okay, so those are the contents of the ITB. So as presented, the bid data sheet shall contain definitions, engineer's authority to issue variations, performance security, inspection of site, program to be submitted, cash flow estimate, and the bid security minimum amount of third-party insurance, time for issue of the notice to commence or yung tinatawag nating notice to proceed. So it also have the time for completion. We also have the details on the amount of the liquidated damages kapag hindi siya nakamit ng deadline. And also the limit of the liquidated damages. And of course, ito amount of bonus for early completion would not be applied on government projects kasi so far walang provisions for that. And then defects liability period, amount of interim payment certificates. So when we say defects liability period, normally for infrastructure projects, the period covers 1 year. And the warranty would cover a certain years according to the classification of the infrastructure that was constructed. So itong defects liability period, dito na i-hold yung retention na tinatawag, that is normally 10% of the project cost. Hinuhold yan ng agency to cover the defect liability period na, for example, may mga unforeseen defects and defects arising from poor workmanship. Dito mako-cover yung amount to cover that. And then percentage of retention, limit of retention money, amount of advance payment. Then start repayment of advance payment. For example, nag-advance payment siya ng around 15%. Normally, ang repayment ng mga advance payment is also the percentage on the progress billing. This is to recover the advance payment, of course. Number of copies of statement of completion and final statement. We also have procedure for settlement of disputes, notice to employer and engineer, and origin of materials and plant. So for evaluation and qualification, this section contains all the criteria that the employer shall use to evaluate bids and quality of bidders if the bidding was not preceded by a pre-qualification exercise and post-qualification is applied. In accordance with items specified in the instruction to bidders, no other methods, criteria, and factors shall be used. The bidder shall provide all the information requested in the forms included in the section. Okay. So, in evaluation, describe the adequacy of technical proposal in case of multiple contracts. The conditions governs completion time. And then for qualification, describe the eligibility, financial situation, staff, experience, and equipment. So, the bidding forms, meron tayong letter of bid, form of bid security, technical proposal forms, bidders qualification forms as bidders data. Like, for example, we have joint venture information, historical contract, non-performance, current contract commitments, historical financial performance, average annual turnover, general and specific experience. So, dito, actually, there is an element to investigate or to trace the track record of a certain constructors. Kung non-performing siya, pwede siyang ma-disqualify on that grounds. In here, we have a diagram for the basic relationships between the various documents. So, all are considered construction documents, yung mga bidding requirements, contract forms, contract conditions, specifications, drawings, addendum, contract modifications. So, all of those are construction documents. While for the bidding documents, it shall cover from bidding requirements up to the addendum. And then the contract documents, we have from contract forms up to contract modifications. When the owner-contractor agreement is signed, these become the contract documents. Now, for the construction documents, as mentioned, we have the contract documents, graphic and written, describe the proposed construction, the work that results from performing services, furnishing labor and supplying and incorporating materials and equipment into the construction. So, meron tayong contract forms, conditions of the contract, specifications, and bill of quantities, yung drawings, and then the addenda, change orders. So, contract forms includes also agreement, performance bond, payment bond, and certificates. So, the conditions of contract, it defines basic rights, responsibilities, and relationships of the parties involved in the construction project. Two types, we have general conditions and supplementary conditions. So, for general conditions, general clauses that establish how the project is to be administered, contain basic expressions of rights, duties, and limitations of the entities involved, usually in the form of published standard documents that include principles common to most construction contracts. In our country, we have here the RA 9184 as a guide. Normally, may mga generic general conditions of the contract that is published in GPPB or the Government Procurement Policy Board. We have also supplementary conditions. So for supplementary conditions, modify or supplement general conditions as need to provide for requirements specific to a project. They are not standardized documents and are prepared for specific project needs. Like for example, may project need na kailangan ng geotechnical engineer with a certain number of experience. So, yun yung pwedeng supplementary conditions. And then, if the procuring entity needs to require experienced structural engineer with a minimum of 15 years experience, yun yung supplementary conditions. And another example, na dapat yung contractor shall have an specific equipment, for example, a pumpcrete. So, i-require mo na dapat yung contractor mo may pump creep. So, those are supplementary conditions. So, we now move on to the agreement. The written document signed by the owner and the contractor that is the legal instrument binding the parties to the contract. So, it defines the relationship and obligations between the owner and the contractor. The agreement is quite brief and appears to consist mostly of statements of fact, whereas the general conditions section deals primarily with matters that pertain generally to the construction work and the persons involved. In other words, the agreement appears to consist of statements and the general conditions appear to be terms or conditions. So the agreement should contain, of course, the names of the contracting parties, and then a brief description of the work, a list of contract documents including agreement, general conditions, drawings, and specifications. So it also contains the contract sum or amount or the lump sum contract, then the procedures for payment, the contract time or dates from start and completion, the signatures of contracting parties and witnesses, and then international construction documents are also often based on industry-prepared standard forms. So a number of organizations prepare recommended standard general conditions and associated forms such as ENA, Engineering Advancement Association of Japan, FIDIC, or International Federation of Consulting Engineers, and then the ICE, Institute of Civil Engineers, JCT, Joint Contracts Tribunal. In our case, we have GPPB, or Government Procurement Policy Board. So perhaps we can see here a sample of agreement form that is generic and published by GPPB. Ito yan. So here is the example. So this agreement made this, and then the date, the month, the year. So between, of course, the procuring entity, and then the address. Okay, and then we have the project name. Okay. So we also have in this agreement, words and expressions shall have the same meanings as respectively assigned to them in the conditions of contract herein after referred to. And the following documents shall be attached, deemed to form and to be read and construed as part of this agreement to it. Ito yung mga attachment or part of this contract agreement. We have general and special conditions of the contract, drawings, plans, specifications, invitation to bid, instruction to bidders, bid data sheet, addenda, bid form including all the documents contained in the bidder's bidding envelopes as annexes, and then the eligibility requirements, documents, or statements. We also have performance security, the credit line issued by a licensed bank, if any, notice of award of contract, and the bidders confirm thereto. Other contract documents may be required by existing laws and or the entity. So in consideration of payments to be made by the entity to the contractor, as hereinafter mentioned, the contractor hereby covenants with the entity to execute and complete the works. Ayan, ito na yung provision na committed dapat yung contractor to finish the work under the satisfaction, under the full satisfaction of the procuring entity. So the entity hereby covenants to pay the contractor. So the obligation of the entity is yun, magbayad ng desired accomplishment by your contractor or the constructor. Okay, so this is just a generic GPPB contract that is being utilized by government when engaging into construction or infrastructure projects. So, ito yung sinasabi natin kanina na omnibus sworn statement sample. So, it's actually a affidavit. Okay? So, on this section, we have bonds and guarantee forms. So, ano itong bond and guarantee forms? So, ito yung requirement ng contractor, of course, to cover yung sinasabi natin kanina, the performance and then the defects liability period. So, in case na merong poor performance or nag-resort tayo sa contract termination. So, paano kapag biglang umayaw yung contractor? Biglang umayaw kasi tumaas yung presyo or hindi niya nakaya yung terms ng contract in which he had agreed to perform. So, to cover those, meron tayong performance band na ni-state kanina kung magkano. Kapag yun, mafo-forfeit yung performance band niya. And the procuring entity could claim that one. Same true with the defects liability, which covers certificates, include certificates of insurance, certificates of compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So, ito naman, advance payment bond. Of course, in government projects, allowed naman mag-advance up to 15%. Of course, to guarantee that the contractor would repay that 15%, meron tayong bond din or surety bond for that. So, we also have the defects liability security or bond pa rin to. After primary taking over, a guarantee is submitted to employer for defect liability valid for 1 year, or as stipulated in whatever policy, especially here in the Philippines, we have RA 9184 or the implementing rules and regulations of RA 9184. So, ito, pagtapos ng project, pagtapos na rin ng defects liability, this is the time wherein the contractor shall issue a guarantee or warranty security, that is, to guarantee that the contractor shall perform his responsibilities and shall answer for any liability arising due to, of course, improper construction, use of inferior quality or standard, any violation of the contract plans and specifications. So, the warranty security should be denominated in Philippine peso. It shall be effective for 1 year from the date of issuance of the certificate of final acceptance. By the way, kapag nag-issue na yung procuring entity ng final acceptance, pwede na nilang i-release yung retention money. So, the warranty security shall be in the form of cash, bank guarantee, or surety bond with the corresponding percentage. So, warranty against hidden defects, of course. Permanent structures that would cover 15 years. Semi-permanent structures, 5 years, and other structures, 2 years. So, ito yung timeline on what we call warranty security. So, yung contractor obligations that will cover up to 15 years maximum from the date of letter of acceptance. And then, as you can see, from the first to the up to the second period or 1 year, that is defects liability period, right after the issuance of certificate of completion. Okay? So within the certificate of completion, dapat before you can have the final inspection, that dapat around 95% complete na yung punch list. Okay? So insurance certificates, insurance for works and contractors' equipment, insurance against injury to persons and damage to property, and insurance for contractors' personnel. So we also have here the general conditions of contract. Itong GCC, the conditions are intended to govern and regulate the obligation of formal contract. And then, although the headings and topics included within different sets of GCC vary, there is a certain similarity of subject matter. So, ito, contents of general conditions for contract. Meron tayong definitions, contract documents, rights and responsibilities of owner, duties and authorities of engineer, rights and responsibilities of contractor, subcontractor, separate contractors, then the time, the payments and completions, changes in the work, protection of persons and property, insurance and bond, disputes, termination of contract, and other miscellaneous provisions. So I think that ends our discussion on construction documents as well as the procurement procedures. So thank you for listening and have a good day, class.